Hi, welcome back. So in this part, we're going to focus on how to tell a story with data. You've found your data, you've gotten to know your data, you've interviewed your data, you've done a lot of great analysis, both visual and statistical with your data, and now it's time to put your data into the story. It can be really tempting to simply put the data, the kind of the hard facts in a sidebar or a special box in your story, or maybe put it in the appendix. But part of the art of data journalism is finding ways to integrate the data and the humans and your story so that it's one really nice, complete, kind of right brain, left brain, holistic package. So I really recommend that you treat your data like a character in your story in the same way that we've been going through the modules here. So that when you're writing up your data journalism piece, you introduce your data just like you would introduce a character. So that makes it warmer, more approachable. Then you talk about what makes them interesting, what makes them wonderful, what makes them strong, what makes them weak. You talk about everything you learned in your data biography. Then what is the foundation of the story that your characters are telling? What's their backstory? Just the basics of the interaction between the characters and why they're interesting. Then you get into the plot twists, and that's usually the meat of your story. So what are the plot twists that are driven by the data? And then how does data and or sort of external on-the-ground reporting, how does that resolve the plot twists? And then finally, what's up next? So next week on, and that's when you talk about the limitations of the work that you've done, the limitations of the data, and any really good data analysis proposes more questions than it answers, which is one of the things that's super frustrating about data analysis. But if you haven't ended up with more questions than you started with and better questions than you started with, you should redo your data analysis. So let's look at an example. We've been working with our water story here. And so let's go through the steps. Let's introduce the characters. The characters in our story are water and equity. And the water data is coming from the Sustainable Society Index. That's DHS data, so it's USA data. The equity data is also coming from the Sustainable Society Index. Some of it is from the World Bank, some of it's from the DHS. It's financial data. What makes this interesting and unusual? Why do we care about these characters? We care about these characters because we're used to thinking of inequality in terms of money. Who has more money? Who has less money? Money could very likely become less meaningful than water in the not too distant future. And equity and access to water could be just as important a way to think about equity as equity and access to money. So we're interested in how equity and water are working together, and then how the third character, money, is influencing that relationship. So that's us kind of using the data to set up the story. What's the foundation of the story that our characters are telling? The water access in a country's population seems to be related to that country's GDP. However, within that country, some countries, the wealthier people are much more likely to be able to access water, and that access is increasing. But that's not true in all countries. What's happening within each country, the data shows different things for different countries. So this is the basic things and the interesting plot twists. The interesting plot twists are that the top countries, so the countries that are increasing in water access, and the bottom countries, the countries that are decreasing in water access, have different things going on within them. So you can be a person living in a country that is rapidly increasing in water access, but be a person living in that country who has lost their water access. Why? And how does the data show that wealth is related to that? So these are the plot twists. How does the data help bring the plot to a conclusion? And that's when we would go into the actual data illustrations that show the directions of the trend and whether wealth is pushing in different directions within different countries. That's how the plot gets resolved using data. And then at each of these levels, you would also be telling the story about a person on the ground in that country that you met or that someone knows through on-the-ground reporting. And then next week on, you always need to end on next week on, because no data analysis is ever the be-all or end-all. What other key indicators could we look at here? Gender, political regime, water regulations, international water treaties. There's lots of things that affect whether a person can access clean water at the individual level and at the country level. So that's an example of how to think about putting data into a story. Here's another example. This is one of my pieces from 538 about how different birth order children have different effects on the happiness of their parents. So we can go through this and we can see introduce the idea, introduce the characters. The characters is the United States General Social Survey and its data on happiness. Then we set up the plot by saying what we're going to do with the characters. And we show the plot twists. What goes up? What goes down? Is baby number 1 harder or is baby number 2 harder? And if so, how? And we tie up the story with some data and some specific narrative. In this case, the narrative is the stories of myself and other women that I know that have had more than 1 child, and whether we got more stressed or less stressed, happier or less happy. Then tell what's coming next. We make sure that in every article we include what the limitations are of this data and what further work needs to be done.